On Friday, June 13, 2025, Israel shocked the world with a high-impact military operation. For several hours, the Israeli Air Force launched a series of carefully coordinated airstrikes against various strategic points in Iran. This offensive was defined by the Israeli government as a preemptive strike, the main objective of which was to halt the advance of Iran's nuclear program, which Tel Aviv considers an existential threat. Israeli authorities confirmed that the order came directly from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who stated that they would not allow Iran to become a nuclear power. The attacks targeted facilities of high military and scientific value. Among the targets hit were the Uranium Enrichment Center at Natanz, nuclear laboratories and structures in Isfahan, the highly protected Parchin military base, and key points in the cities of Tabriz and Hamadan, where Iran had established missile and ballistic technology platforms. For this operation, Israel deployed state-of-the-art F-35 fighters, armed drones, and electronic warfare units that, according to unofficial reports, managed to disable part of Iran's air defense system before the main impact. The Mossad has also reportedly played a crucial role in infiltrating systems and disabling defensive protocols from within. The result was devastating for Iran. Amid the fire and debris, the chief of staff of the Iranian armed forces, General Mohammad Hossein, one of the regime's most powerful men, died. Along with him, at least 3 other senior military commanders also lost their lives. In addition, several independent reports indicate the deaths of 5 scientists directly linked to Iran's nuclear program, although Tehran has refused to officially confirm their identities. The death toll exceeds 80 and could approach 120, including technicians, soldiers, and security personnel from the attacked facilities. Iran's reaction was swift. In the following hours, the Tehran government launched a barrage of ballistic missiles and suicide drones in the direction of Israel. Several of these projectiles managed to hit urban areas of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, causing at least 14 deaths and numerous injuries, despite the efforts of the Iron Dome defense system, which managed to intercept most of the targets. Images of smoke, destruction, and air raid sirens became a reflection of a region that has, once again, entered a dangerous spiral. Iran called the Israeli attack a declaration of war and immediately called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Meanwhile, the entire world watches with concern. The United States, although not directly involved in the operation, reaffirmed its support for Israel's defense. Russia and China condemned the attacks, warning of the risk of an unprecedented regional escalation. In Europe, reactions were more cautious, with calls for restraint and dialogue. The tension is also reflected in the markets. Global stock markets reacted with sharp declines and oil prices soared, confirming that this conflict is no longer merely military, but global. Israel's operation against Iran is expected to last weeks, not days, and is proceeding with implicit U.S. approval, according to White House and Israeli officials. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was clear and firm before the international media. This operation will continue for as many days as necessary to eliminate this threat. Our war is not against the people of Iran, but against their oppressive regime. The Iranian people are our future partners. Do not squander your hope. This could result in regime change. I urge the Iranian people to rise up against their clerical leaders. These words reflect not only Israel's military strategy, but also a political stance that seeks to separate the Iranian people from their current leadership, while justifying the attacks as part of a defensive war. For his part, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz raised the tone even further, warning, "Tehran will burn if its supreme leader continues the attacks." A statement that made clear the level of response Israel is prepared to maintain if Iran escalates the conflict. From Tehran, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei did not hold a press conference, but his message was broadcast by state media. The perpetrators will pay a bitter and painful price. His office called for resistance and vowed that Iran would not bow to foreign pressure, indicating that the conflict was far from over. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was more direct from UN headquarters. These attacks amount to a declaration of war. Iran will respond with full determination to protect its sovereignty unless the aggression ceases. Finally, from Washington, a White House official confirmed that the United States was aware of and did not oppose the Israeli operation. The Israeli operation against Iran has our implicit support. The Trump administration firmly believes this can be resolved by continuing negotiations with the United States. We are not going to order Israel to do anything except defend itself. Finally, as missiles crisscross the skies of the Middle East and tensions between Israel and Iran reach unprecedented levels, a less visible but equally alarming reality lurks behind. Both nations are experiencing deep economic crises. Behind the din of war lies a structural deterioration that is impacting their productive, fiscal, and social foundations. Now, we want to approach this topic in light of biblical prophecy. What is happening today is not just a geopolitical conflict between Israel and Iran. It's much more than missiles, airplanes, and diplomatic meetings. It's the progressive fulfillment of a scenario that the Bible anticipated centuries ago. The war in the Middle East comes as no surprise to those familiar with the scriptures. On the contrary, it confirms what the Holy Spirit had already revealed through the prophets. Israel, the land of promise, is once again at the center of the world stage, and this is no coincidence. Since its restoration as a nation in 1948, every conflict involving Jerusalem, every attempt to destroy it, every enemy that rises, is part of a prophetic plan that points toward the end times. Iran, ancient Persia, is not a new enemy in this story. In the books of Ezekiel and Daniel, this region is already mentioned as one of the nations that will ally with other powers in the end times to threaten God's people. What we see today, missiles crossing the skies, threats of total war, calls for international resistance, are echoes of a spiritual war being waged behind the visible curtain. And the most disturbing thing is that this conflict is occurring as the entire world reels from economic, political, and moral crises. Markets are shaking, nations are aligning, and military alliances are being activated. All of this shows us that we are entering a new prophetic stage, a prelude to greater events that the Bible calls the beginning of sorrows. Biblical prophecy doesn't leave us in the dark. It warns us, prepares us, and reminds us that history is not in the hands of governments, armies, or nuclear powers. It is in the hands of the one who established his throne in the heavens and whose redemptive plan is being fulfilled in every timeline. Therefore, rather than analyzing the news, we must discern signs. Rather than fearing war, we must understand the times. And rather than focusing on politics, we must raise our eyes because redemption is approaching. For centuries, the scriptures have warned us about a series of events that would mark the end of time. We're not talking about dark symbols, but clear realities that are unfolding before our eyes today. Iran is in the Bible and not by accident. What we see in the headlines today is not simply a geopolitical dispute. This isn't just a modern conflict between two countries. What's happening between Iran and Israel has spiritual and prophetic roots, and the Bible, once again, had already foretold it. The prophet Ezekiel, in chapter 38, revealed that in the last days, a coalition of nations would rise against Israel. And among those nations is Persia, the ancient name for what we know today as Iran. Let us notice what it says in Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 1 to 5. The word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will break you in pieces and put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you out, and all your army, horses and horsemen, fully equipped, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them carrying swords, Persia, Cush, and Put with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Chapter 38 of Ezekiel presents us with one of the most enigmatic and powerful prophecies of the Old Testament. It describes a coalition of nations that will rise up in the end times to attack Israel, a restored nation dwelling confidently in its land. Among the names mentioned, Persia stands out, an ancient power we know today as Iran. This mention is neither minor nor symbolic, but prophetically precise. Ezekiel, inspired by the Spirit of God, wrote this message more than 2,500 years ago, long before the rise of Islam, the founding of the modern state of Israel in 1948, or the establishment of Iran as an Islamic republic after the 1979 revolution. However, this passage already reveals a reality that resonates strongly in our days. God tells Ezekiel that he prophesies against Gog, prince of the land of Magog, and mentions his allies in this final invasion, among them Persia, along with Cush and Put. Many biblical scholars and historians agree that Magog represents the region we know today as Russia. This interpretation gains strength when looking at the current geopolitical landscape, where Russia has become one of Iran's main allies in the Middle East. They have cooperated militarily in Syria, upheld common strategic interests, and on more than one occasion, adopted a united stance against the West and Israel. The link between Russia and Iran, then, is not a mere historical coincidence. It is a prophetic echo of Ezekiel's text. Persia's inclusion in this coalition is deeply significant. In the ancient context, Persia was a majestic, civilized, and powerful empire. But the prophecy does not point to the Persia of the past, but to a future participation, when Israel has been gathered in its land and lives in confidence. Today, Iran is the direct heir of biblical Persia, and surprisingly, it is one of the most hostile nations toward Israel. Its leaders have openly declared their desire to see Israel wiped off the map. Iran finances and militarily supports Israel's enemies, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Shiite militias in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. This ongoing pattern of antagonism is not simply political, it is spiritual, prophetic, and eschatological. Iran's hatred of Israel has spanned generations and has intensified in recent decades. It has invested millions in weapons programs, including ballistic missile development and potential nuclear capabilities, all with the goal of establishing itself as a dominant force in the Middle East. From a biblical perspective, all of this fits with the prophetic scene Ezekiel describes: a restored Israel, surrounded by enemies, and a coalition led by forces from the north and east, Magog, Russia, and Persia, Iran, ready to descend upon the Holy Land like a storm. This event, which has yet to occur in history, has sparked great eschatological interest, as it seems to fit perfectly with the current geopolitical landscape. But one of the most important questions that arise when studying this passage is, when will this invasion happen? Before the rapture of the church? During the tribulation? Afterward? Although the Bible doesn't give an exact date, it does offer clues that allow us to wisely discern the timing. One of the clearest clues is in Ezekiel chapter 39, verses 9 and 12, where it is mentioned that, after the defeat of the invaders, Israel will take 7 years to burn the weapons and 7 months to bury the corpses. This detail is crucial. If we connect this information with the biblical eschatological framework, we find that the last 7 years before Christ's physical return are reserved for the period known as the Great Tribulation, divided into 2 halves of 3.5 years each. But during the second half of that period, Israel will be on the run and under intense persecution from the Antichrist. In such a chaotic context, it is unreasonable to think that the nation would have the freedom, stability, or security to spend 7 years collecting weapons and clearing the battlefield. Therefore, many scholars conclude that this war cannot occur within the tribulation, especially in its final phase. This has led to an interpretation that places the invasion of Gog and Magog before the tribulation and probably before the rapture of the church. This position gains strength when we observe how the prophecy describes Israel at the time of the invasion, dwelling safely, without walls, without bars, and without gates. This image does not reflect a persecuted Israel, but rather a prosperous, stable, and militarily secure nation. And that's exactly what we see today. A restored Israel, technologically advanced, with strategic alliances and regional peace agreements, but still surrounded by enemies who yearn for its destruction. Furthermore, this interpretation harmonizes with the doctrine of the imminent rapture of the church, as taught in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Whether the church will be raptured before judgment falls on the earth, and whether this war involves direct intervention from God with fire, earthquakes, hail, confusion, and a glorious demonstration of his power. Then it could be the final act of divine warning before closing the age of grace and beginning the tribulation. God himself says in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 23, "And I will be exalted and sanctified, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they will know that I am the Lord." This language points to a global revelation of God's power, just before he hides his face during the time of judgment. Now, it is very important to make a key distinction. This battle of Gog and Magog described in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 should not be confused with the other battle of Gog and Magog mentioned in Revelation chapter 20 verses 7 through 9, which occurs at the end of the millennium, when Satan will be released for a short time after having been bound for 1,000 years. At that final event, Satan will again gather the nations to attack the saints and the beloved city, but he will be consumed by fire from heaven. Although both battles share names and symbolically similar enemies, the contexts are completely different. One occurs before Christ's millennial kingdom, and the other occurs at its end. They are two different scenarios in the prophetic timeline, with different purposes and outcomes. Now, returning to the study of the passage from Ezekiel, we cannot overlook a prophetic detail of great relevance: the alliance between Magog, identified by many as Russia, and Persia, present-day Iran. Today, these countries are more aligned than ever, cooperating and sharing geopolitical and religious interests opposed to Israel. Seeing Iran constantly threatening to destroy Israel while Russia expands its influence in the Middle East is no coincidence. It's the progressive fulfillment of what Ezekiel saw millennia ago. However, when the nations led by Gog, representing Magog, Russia, Persia, Iran, and other allies, rise up against a seemingly unsuspecting and unprotected Israel, the God of hosts will rise up with jealousy and fury. Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 18 to 23 powerfully describes this intervention. God says that he will be angry, and in his fury he will unleash a great earthquake upon the land of Israel. The mountains will tremble, the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all men will be shaken. But the most impressive thing is that God will confuse the invading armies, causing them to attack each other. Then he will send torrential rain, hail, fire, and sulfur upon them and their lands. This action will not only destroy their enemies, but will also make it clear that it was not Israel who won the battle, but God himself who fought for his people. As in the days of Moses, when the sea parted, or as in the days of Jehoshaphat, when enemies destroyed one another, God will intervene again without Israel needing to raise a sword. It will be an act of judgment, justice, and redemption. The purpose of this intervention is not only to protect Israel, but to glorify God's name before the nations. In Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 23, the Lord declares, "And I will be exalted and sanctified, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they will know that I am the Lord." This will be a pivotal moment in prophetic history. The entire world will witness God's mighty hand defending his people, not because of their merits, but because of his eternal covenant. Israel will witness that its true protector is not its military technology or its diplomatic alliances, but the eternal God who made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In Ezekiel 39, the judgment continues. God says he will give Gog and his armies as food for the birds of prey and the beasts of the field. This will not be a simple military conflict. It will be divine intervention, a moment of judgment, a cry of warning to the world. Therefore, Iran is moving toward its prophetic destiny. Iran's offensive is not new, but now with each passing day, it aligns more closely with what God revealed. Iran is marching toward its prophetic destiny, pulling other nations along with it, fulfilling what was written millennia ago. This is not just a political conflict, it is the prophetic clock ticking. Now in Daniel chapter 10, a spiritual window opens to us that few understand, but that changes everything. Daniel had been praying and fasting for 21 days, seeking revelation, but he wasn't getting an answer. Why? When the angel of the Lord finally appears to him, he says something shocking. Let us read Daniel chapter 10, verse 13. "But for 21 days, the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia prevented me from passing. Then Michael, one of the archangels, came to help me, and I left him there with the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia. This prince of the kingdom of Persia cannot be a mere human ruler. Here we are talking about a spiritual entity, a territorial demonic power, operating in the invisible realm, but exerting direct influence over the political and governmental affairs of Persia, present-day Iran. This passage opens our eyes to a powerful yet disturbing truth. The nations of the earth are influenced and even dominated by principalities and powers in the heavenly realms, as Ephesians chapter 6 verse 12 also confirms. What we see in politics, in armed conflicts, in government decisions, is often not simply the work of humankind, but the result of spiritual forces seeking to resist God's purposes in history. The angel sent to Daniel was blocked by this entity for 21 days. This teaches us that the spiritual world is organized, that darkness has hierarchies, and that there are demons assigned to regions, empires, and civilizations seeking to hinder, manipulate, and stop divine plans. This truth is neither symbolic nor allegorical. It is spiritual and concrete. Persia had its prince. Greece would have its own, as the same angel warns in Daniel chapter 10 verse 20. And this leads us to an unavoidable conclusion. Nations have spiritual powers that act behind visible governments. In the midst of this invisible battle, another crucial figure appears, Michael, the archangel. He is no ordinary angel. His title, according to Daniel chapter 12 verse 1, introduces him thus: "Then Michael, the great prince who will protect your people, will arise." That is, if Persia has a demonic prince, Israel has a heavenly prince, Michael, the defender of God's purposes for his people. The fight between the messenger angel and the prince of Persia is only resolved when Michael intervenes to help. This shows us that in the spiritual realm there are high-level clashes over the fate of nations, and that God has assigned Michael as Israel's spiritual protector in times of war and prophetic fulfillment. All of this leads us to an unavoidable conclusion. The confrontation between Iran and Israel is neither a recent nor exclusively political issue. It is the tangible expression of a spiritual war that has been going on since ancient times. What to many seems like a simple territorial conflict is actually part of an invisible battle, deeply rooted in God's eternal purpose. Iran, ancient Persia, was the scene of spiritual resistance in the days of the prophet Daniel. That same opposition continues to manifest itself today, albeit with new faces and strategies. The systematic contempt for Israel, the constant threats of destruction, the support for violent organizations, and theological hatred of the Jewish people are not accidents of fate. They are the contemporary reflection of a spiritual agenda contrary to God's plan. As a Shiite Islamic republic, Iran not only opposes Israel, it also harasses followers of Jesus Christ within its borders. Their system, marked by repression, ideological control, and religious intolerance, reflects the active presence of powers operating in the heavenly realms, resisting anything that glorifies God. It's no coincidence that both the Jewish people and the church are in the crosshairs. Both represent alliances that the enemy wishes to destroy. And yet, the power of darkness is subject to limits. No hidden government, no invisible principality can act beyond what God has determined in his sovereignty. Evil may rage, but its fall is assured. God remains seated on his throne, guiding history toward its glorious conclusion. Dear listener, as the conflict between Iran and Israel escalates, the world is interpreting it as a geopolitical issue, yet another dispute between opposing nations. But for those who believe in the eternal word of God, this is not a simple conflict. It's a sign, an urgent warning, a prophetic thundering that shakes everyone who still has an ear to hear. Jesus wasn't vague. He spoke clearly when he said, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must happen." The conflict between these two nations is not outside the prophetic script. On the contrary, it is part of a divine plan that is moving forward relentlessly. Israel, the nation God chose to reveal his glory, is also the epicenter of the eschatological drama. Iran, for its part, represents a spiritual shadow rising from ancient hatred. What is happening between them is not just politics, it's a spiritual battle with ancient roots. and eternal consequences. And while this is happening, what is the church doing? Is she praying, watching, proclaiming the message of the kingdom with power? Or is she asleep, distracted, divided, seeking comfort in a crumbling world? This is no time for indifference. It's time to awaken from our lethargy, because what is happening before our eyes, Jesus announced clearly. He warned us not to be afraid, but to be prepared. We can't live as if the world will remain the same forever. We can't preach as if we have all the time in the world. Every missile that flies over the Middle East is a reminder that the prophetic clock keeps ticking. Every threat, every broken agreement, every alliance formed, cries out to us that the Lord's return is near. Jesus is coming. Everything written will be fulfilled. And while the world is shaken, the church must stand firm, not paralyzed by fear but fired by the Spirit, not distracted but determined, not lukewarm but passionately surrendered to the Lord. This is not the end yet, but it is the beginning of sorrows. And if we don't wake up now, when will we? The conflict between Iran and Israel is much more than a war. It is a call from heaven. And the church has only one response. Yes, Lord Jesus, come soon. But until it comes, may it find us watching. And so we come to the end of this video. We sincerely hope it has been a great blessing to your life and that it has touched your heart with profound reflection. We invite you to like it, subscribe to our channel, and share this message with your family and friends so they too can be edified by this teaching. May God bless you abundantly.